Welcome, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us for this month's Tech Tuesday, uh, presented by the Medical Center of the Americas Innovation Center. Today, we're really excited to have Erik Pavia with us. He is the founder and CEO of ORDRS. ORDRS is a platform that connects healthcare startups, health systems, and health plans to testing services. And I'm really excited to hear about Erik's journey, how he came up with the idea, and what his company is working on specifically, and what maybe their pitfalls are or challenges, and especially their successes. So I'm going to turn this over to Erik Pavia, who is the entrepreneur in residence with the Innovation Center and is founder of his own startup. And so, Erik, please, I'm turning it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. Hi, everyone. For the people who don't know me, a brief introduction. As Nancy said, I'm the entrepreneur in residence for the Medical Center of America's Innovation Center. It's a nonprofit located in El Paso, Texas. It's working to increase access to health and medical services in the El Paso, Juarez, and Las Cruces region. So like many Hispanic areas, it's chronically underserved as it relates to health and medical services. And as part of doing that, the MCA is also working on promoting more entrepreneurship in the health and medical spaces. The thinking being, if we have more companies who are building more services, some of these services can help to serve the populations in the region. So this series of conversations that we started is really a way for us to bring stories from people who have started their own companies, whether it's in the medical or health space, or just in another space that's been traditionally overlooked. One of the things that we've realized in talking to a bunch of entrepreneurs, especially other Hispanic and Latino entrepreneurs, is people who live in these or come up in these underserved and overlooked communities tend to be really good at identifying problems that are also overlooked and that aren't being serviced properly. Wanted to interview you, Erik, because your story is pretty cool. We've spoken a little bit about how you've gotten started in building ORDRS. You not only are a Hispanic guy in Houston, Texas, not in Silicon Valley, you're not on the coast. You've also built the company organically and bootstrapped your way into what's been a profitable company. So you're taking no VC money, which is not the traditional path. So I wanted to have a conversation about what that looked like, how you came about the problems that you're solving, and how you're going about solving them. So Nancy already gave a little bit of an intro about you, but to get things started, can you just kind of give us a short bio? Where are you from? What was the trajectory in your life going from where you started to building ORDRS, and how did you get to where you're at now?
Sure. So I'm from Houston, Texas, and I grew up on the east side of town, which 98% Hispanic. When I moved into the area, I was about 5. So, spent most of my life and most of my formative years in a neighborhood where it was pretty rough. And that, I think, helped. Growing up in a household where, single mom, school teacher, going with her across town to go to elementary school, but at the same time living in a neighborhood that was not like my elementary school, middle school, very diverse. So I had the best of both worlds in a way. But what it caused me to do is that it caused me to realize that there are two different and multiple perspectives on the world we live in. I think that really just shaped a lot of my problem solving skills and a lot of my empathy. And I think if you are creating something, there's a lot of design, a lot of empathy that goes into solving problems. And so I think back at that all the time, because I think some of the best talent in terms of how we're going to approach a problem I think that comes from folks who have diverse backgrounds, and the struggles we've gone through all end up shaping some of the solutions. Specifically, and kind of fast forwarding a little bit, I did not at all think I would be an entrepreneur until maybe second year of college. There was a business club, and really I started thinking about what a business would look like, and started my first website. Back then, this is 2001. You weren't really trying to build a business. You just wanted to own a cool website. That was really the motivation. And I felt really cool being able to tell people, oh yeah, you can go to my website and you can see all the menus for the restaurants downtown. So that was kind of first foray into having a startup. And then from there, progressively solving different problems, creating better products. And yeah, that was kind of my first deal there.
And I want to come back to sort of like your initial stages as an entrepreneur, but how did you get to building or deciding that you were going to work on something like Orders and building what eventually became Orders?
Yeah, that's great. So I think the first thing is that I was always doing something in tech and not in healthcare until 2013, when a buddy of mine who was in San Antonio at the time was working for a health system in San Antonio. And he liked the work I had done on another application that he knew about, another project that I launched with a couple of folks. And he asked if I would be willing to help design something in healthcare. And I met with I think it was the Baptist Breast Center in San Antonio. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of empathy research. And you heard stories and testimony from patients and how they felt upon diagnosis of breast cancer. You heard financially how challenging things were. You heard all this information. And honestly, at that moment, I kind of felt like what I was doing, sure, anything I had created before affected people and really helped people. It was convenient. But in healthcare, it took that to a whole nother level. And I was just starting to get the feeling and the sense of what I later found out would be what our goal is in healthcare, to improve outcomes. And that little interaction, helping out with that application, actually turned into me and that buddy starting our first startup in healthcare. And we attended we were selected for an accelerator out of South Carolina. It was a digital health accelerator. In 2014, there were not many digital health accelerators. And so we jumped at the chance, moved for 3 months. And what we were doing in oncology was really assisting in trying to create a software that was much like a patient portal, but it was just for the messaging aspect to help nurse navigators ensure that patients weren't falling through the cracks when it came to treatment. I mean, literally getting them to the hospital. If they didn't have a ride, figuring out how to get them a gas card or get them on the bus. That level of messaging and engagement was so important to us. What we found in that accelerator, when we spoke to the CIOs and the CEOs in South Carolina, is that how we were positioning ourselves was much like a patient portal. And to someone who maybe have spent $2 million on an EMR and, as a CIO or CEO of a health system, they looked at a patient portal as, well, that's something we get for free with our EMR, whether that was, GE or, Epic or whoever. And so that ended up for us was kind of the nail in the coffin. We could not figure out how to go past, how to sort of compete with that, if you will. It was a little difficult to try to sell something that big box healthcare or large healthcare vendors was giving away for free. And so in 2015, we had to shut down that business. And so from that point, I knew that all this time in tech and this little time in healthcare, I knew I wanted to keep building products for people. So I started a consulting firm. And in 2015 to 2018, we had about 17 companies in healthcare, all doing various aspects, all kinds of things in healthcare. But there were 3 companies that were in diagnostics or in lab testing. And I realized they were building a lot of the same tech. And that's when sort of the
Same, go ahead.
idea first came around for building a physician network that would serve just lab testing customers. There was a lot to it. I'll stop there for a second because I think it's worth mentioning. Back then in 2015 or 2016, when I started connecting with my first lab testing company as a consultant, I started to realize that there were more and more companies, tech companies, doing things in healthcare. And at one point I was a big Apple iPhone fan. And at that point, there were literally only about 60 apps in the App Store that were healthcare or fitness focused. And if you think about that today, I don't know how many there are today, but I guarantee you there's way more than that. And I think it's important to think about at that time in that climate, you had healthcare starting to fragment. And so somebody would say, I'm going to go do a prescription, or I'm going to go do one-on-one engagement, telemedicine, or I'm going to do lab testing. And you saw companies sort of fragment healthcare in a way. And it's been happening ever since. And I started realizing that in lab testing, there was not a lot of infrastructure. As you may know, lab testing, if you think about it, probably the first thing that comes to mind is you're going to go get a blood draw. Maybe what comes to mind is you're going to have a physician that's providing you your results. Of course, what probably comes to mind is that some lab is going to analyze that sample. 10 years ago, even 12 years ago, all of that was done in a clinical setting. But what everybody witnessed in the past 2 years was that lab testing is done in a remote, on-demand fashion. I can drive down the street and there's a drive-through that's doing COVID testing. There are lab tests in a box on a shelf at your CVS and Target, or you can go online and see companies marketing lab tests that they'll deliver to your door. With that being said, today what's happening in healthcare and lab testing is that lab testing is available in a remote fashion, and you need infrastructure. You need a physician network. You need labs that are have the capacity to run those tests, and you need a way to result to patients. And so ORDRS built an entire platform that offers all of that. And in 2018, when we started the company, we really just started with the fact that we knew physician network built specifically for lab testing was going to be in demand with just the few customers we saw in the space back in 2018. And then with the pandemic, it was just game changer for us. It revolutionized our business.
So, you kind of talk like at a very high level,
Sure.
What you're building, but like, what specifically, like where in that process do you guys like plug in as part of like the lab infrastructure, and what are the services that you're providing to customers? And then I have a bunch of follow-up questions.
Sure, absolutely. So if you think about our customer can be a startup who just wants to sell lab testing, or they can be a telehealth company who maybe they've been around several years and are just now wanting to launch lab testing. So if you think about a telemedicine company, we can allow a telemedicine company, can allow their physicians to press a button and we'll ship a kit to their patient. We do that through partnering with labs for specific pricing on those lab tests. We built a physician network that allows for the compliance side. So every lab test, just like a prescription drug, requires a physician approval. So we built that network of physicians. So customers that are selling direct to consumer, you may think they're online selling this lab test, there's no physician involved. Well, actually, you have to have this physician sign off, but the company doesn't make you do that. They actually work with a company like us to have physicians in the background approving the order, reviewing results before the customer sees them. So at a high level, we're a virtual supply chain for lab testing. That means all the stakeholders from the physician that authorizes the order, the requisition, it reviews your results and might reach out to you if you have a critical level or some kind of result that requires outreach, to the lab, to a company that's sole purpose is to drop ship a test kit. We put all that in our platform so that our customers can literally activate and enable those services without having to get a contract with a lab, without having to build their own physician network. and without having to stand up and figure out, oh, this sample requires this kind of test kit. Oh, and this sample requires this kind of test kit. We've figured it all out for our customer so they can tell us, you know what, we're looking for a fertility test. We're a new company and we want to launch in all 50 states. And we can show them the ways that that kind of testing can be launched in the particular states they want to be launched in.
And I mean, as you mentioned, COVID, the timing with COVID was really fortuitous for you guys because the need for testing, and I think the end consumer's willingness to do at-home lab testing has completely changed, right? What you know, part of that is timing, but part of that is also insight. Like, what have you all been doing differently than some of your competitors that have allowed you to grow and acquire the customers that you have?
That's great. I think the best example is really we were built out of sheer necessity, right? I think as a consultant, I was able to take a look at what our customers were doing, and I just had this curiosity about, okay, you need to connect to these labs, you need to connect to this physician network, but how does it all work? I was so curious about how it worked that if you're a consultant for someone, you want to evaluate everything you could possibly evaluate to see if it'll work for your customer. You want to be the hero, right? And you want to build something for them that works. And in order to do that properly, you're going to evaluate every possible vendor. You're going to vet them out because you're going to make sure you've covered every point of failure. If this is a mission critical, this is healthcare, right? So if this is a mission critical part of our business, I'm going to figure out how it works. And as I started looking into all these companies that I had to contract with or to enable to help some of my lab testing customers, I realized they weren't really serving the need. They were built on the expectations of a almost bygone era, right? They were built on these expectations and service levels that the patient's going to go into a service center, get a blood draw, and the physician front office is going to call the patient. So we really thought about the future of this space. And honestly, in 2018, there was no way we could have ever imagined there'd be a pandemic. We were so excited about the future of consumer-driven healthcare that it was driving all of this desire on our part to build the best possible platform for health tech companies in the future of healthcare, that we really wanted to build the best technology platform. And it just so happened that, COVID happened, and it actually allowed us to say, you know what, this is just another lab test if we think about it on our platform. So let's get our customers enabled with this lab test. Let's show them the capacity that exists with these labs, show them pricing, and get them to be able to test, run samples, and help patients. Yeah, so I mean, I think for us, differentiators among the competition, we're thinking about this from a very future-driven perspective, but we also come to it with this idea that we were builders. I've always been an entrepreneur, and when it comes time to stand up a vendor, a third-party vendor, you want to be sure that they are taking into account not just your business needs, but your business model. And I think that we've looked at our customers in this space. We've responded to their requests, and I think we've built the best possible platform that allows our customers to not only launch the services they need in lab testing, but that are also there to support them in the future, in their future growth. And we're continuing to improve every step, every iteration, and every new customer.
That's awesome, man. And I mean, what you're discussing with your competitors and the research that you've done into the landscape, yeah, like you said, they kind of had a view of the world that was stuck in the past, and you were very future focused, and that presented an opportunity to you. But why do you think that had remained a blind spot for so many of these service providers? Do you have any theories for like why they were stuck in the past, not looking forward towards the future in the same way that you were?
Yeah, I really think that, I think it comes down to, we had the benefit of not having huge opportunities early on. And I know that sounds silly, sounds counterintuitive actually. But when you think about it, is, you have these larger so at the time we started, there was only one competitor, and they were dealing with large opportunities, big companies. And so they didn't really have to be that innovative. They just had to get the deal done. And for us, well, we had to think differently. It's like, okay, they can sell one contract, and it would take us 20 customers to amass that level of volume and revenue. So how do we ensure that we can launch 20 customers? How do we ensure that we can serve those 20 customers? We had to figure out ways to make our platform more approachable. And then at the same time, we had to make sure that if we're serving our customer, we've got the ability to meet their needs from a technology, a compliance, multiple levels. And so really looking at the landscape, I knew that if we had a tech forward platform, API driven, that would be a talking point for, some of the most influential people at a tech company are the tech leadership, the CTOs of the world. I needed to have their buy-in. And so very quickly we did things like build on a platform like GraphQL, which is a API framework that super popular among developers, but it's also a very much welcome technology for our customers dev teams.
And so these insights into what, like your CTO, the CTO that you would be working with, did they come from the days that you were doing consulting, or was this after you decided to go down that route? You started doing a bunch of customer discovery. Like, how did you arrive at those insights around the distribution specifically?
So there's two major things I would recommend. I would have to that come to mind. I would say one is I started seeing that companies like Stripe and PayPal, they were just so, I guess they really had a knack for trying to make sure that their platform could be implemented. And very often their marketing and their websites were devoted to the developer. They knew that the CEO might make an ultimate decision, but they knew that the CEO was dependent on the CTO to really inform that decision. And so I wanted to model us what we were doing after the Stripes of the world, and in a way that said, okay, we're technology first. We can definitely help in that regard. But the other thing that comes to mind, and really, I think this is the unsung hero of our organization, is we put together an initial team, a chief medical officer, CTO, a compliance person that allowed us to view the world through their eyes, and really helped us build a platform that wasn't just tech and wasn't just healthcare and wasn't just policy. It had to consider all of that. Again, you're only building products that have consensus, given you have constraints, you have needs, and we wanted to make sure that from our leadership perspective, compliance and technology and clinical, they were all at the table driving our product early on.
And this insight of having to get all of the leadership bought in, and the example of compliance, I'm guessing this came from your time as a consultant and like getting to understand that space.
Right. Yeah, I would say a little bit of that. I guess that's super fair to say, right? Like during the time that I was a consultant, I had to you get to learn what trade-offs, how to position trade-offs for your client. And so now I'm the client in a way, right? And so in my consulting days, I would have had to put together a gap analysis, or I would have had to evaluate and vet out vendors. And now what I'm doing for our organization as a startup is trying to figure out, okay, do we build a physician network first, or do we build a network of people that are going to ship test kits? And so we definitely arrived at building out the physician network first, but a lot of experience as a consultant helped. But really over the years, and since 2001, what I realized is that over those years, I was a product-driven person. And for me, product is figuring out the overlap between what the customer wants and what the business needs, right? That is such for us, it's where value is created. The business needs to be able to accomplish its business needs, but the customer needs to accomplish, their business needs. And so it helped for sure. Over the years, sort of refining what it means to build for your user and taking into account how they're going to use your platform. It really informed what we built with Orders.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think one thing about your story that's great is I think there's this popular misconception that entrepreneurs and tech entrepreneurs are college kids in their in their dorm room, in like a hoodie, and they're building like the next super innovative platform. But when you look at the numbers and you hear these stories, most entrepreneurs or successful founders are people who have decades of insight into either specific industry or specific customer needs. And I mean, you got your entrepreneurship journey started in 2001. Like about you're 21 at this point. Your entrepreneurship journey is old enough to drink. It goes against a lot of those conceptions that people have about needing to start really young, or you're not really successful if you're like past the age of 25 and you're not like a billionaire yet, right? So that's a great insight. Kind of shifting gears a little bit. One thing that I really admire about you and I'm super impressed about is your ability to bootstrap orders. So that's something that comes up quite a bit. I think in conversations is I personally think there's like a bit of an obsession with venture capital that is maybe more of like a celebrity fixation than it is a business need. So can you share a bit about how you ended up bootstrapping and why you did that instead of raising funds from a traditional venture capital fund?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the main takeaway that I'll share is, as a business owner, when you have the ability to really understand product market fit out of the gate, you've put together a stellar team of leadership. There's the potential to bootstrap. There's also the potential to raise. What I noticed about our journey in particular is being a consultant, we were super privileged to have this network of folks who heard about us from somewhere or trusted us with their healthcare tech. And so what that turned into is, over the 3 years that I had the consulting firm, the final customer that approached as we were a consulting firm was in lab testing and said, hey, we have this need to build out this platform. And what they wanted us to build was not unlike what we had built for other customers. But what I told them is, you've caught us in an interesting position because we are getting ready to spin out this new technology. It's an API for physician networks, or for physician authorization and lab testing. You're going to need that to launch. If you'll take this journey with us, and if you'll trust us, know that we can still provide the professional services you need to build out your consumer-facing website, your storefront, even your patient portal. But on the physician network side, that's something we're building. That's our IP. You want to be real clear about that. And we were super fortunate for this customer to come along with us on that journey and to help basically fund our seed round, if you will. But they understood that they didn't have to, they had to commit as a professional services customer, but they understood that what we were building in that technology, that was already in motion. And so as long as those, expectations are clear, I think it's possible that you can sometimes bootstrap your way into revenue even before you start. And we were just fortunate to do that. And my time as a consultant, it allowed me to build a contract for them that was separate entirely from an IP perspective from what we were building. And it worked. And that was just, when you don't have, and not for lack of trying, like we have always spoken to investors. And in the early days, lab testing was just something that investors felt was already solved. And I don't know if many of the folks on this call, your experience in healthcare, you probably run into a lot of people who imagine that they give healthcare a lot of credit. They say, oh, well, isn't somebody already doing that? And quite frankly, there was only one other organization that was doing what we wanted to do. And so we thought there was a huge opportunity And it was a little difficult for us to really convince investors early days that this was something that was going to be big.
What I'm just curious, as part of that conversation, investors are coming to you and they're telling you that it's like already a solved problem. Like what did those conversations look like? Because I'm sure you had an answer to that. What was your answer to the it's already solved question? Because that's a question that comes up. I think every entrepreneur has heard that from a VC, right? Oh, somebody's already doing this. How did you go about answering that? And why do you think that whatever argument you were making wasn't convincing to the VCs? Either maybe it was your own storytelling or just the VC's ability to like follow along.
Yeah, I think from a healthcare perspective, it probably seemed like, hey, how much of lab testing is really going to happen outside of a healthcare setting? That I think was the biggest obstacle. That admittedly, that was probably a very challenging thing to deal with. And for me to again, there's no pandemic in sight, right? And so in 2018, we're talking and we're evangelizing the future of digital health or health 2.0, health tech companies that are going to be in lab testing. And in the mind of an entrepreneur, and probably in my mind as well, I'm thinking these are just going to be companies doing lab testing. Because again, healthcare had fractured. You have just lab testing companies, just pharmaceuticals, just telemedicine. And we probably could have sold it better, as in what we're witnessing today, which is, sure, healthcare is fractured, but now a company that has spent the last 4 or 5 years doing lab testing is also figuring out how to do pharmaceuticals. The company that's been doing prescription meds for the last 5 years is also figuring out how to add lab testing or telemedicine. So those are things that speak to the bigger picture and probably could have helped us convince investors early on. But here's the thing,
Yes, sir.
as an entrepreneur, you prioritize what is going to create the most value. And when you have a contract in hand from a customer who says, not only am I a professional services contract for you, but I'm also a customer who's going to happily sign on to pay you a monthly fee and a fee per click from now until, whenever. That was my focus. And very quickly, investors became, back burner for us. We wanted to serve the customer, and we started speaking to more customers. And that's, you just started, you prioritize those customer conversations above all else.
Have you, given where the company is at, you've been able to scale your revenue base. Is venture funding something you're just not considering anymore? And if that's the case, like why or why not?
No, I think it's still something we would consider. I just spoke to an investor this morning. I think as an entrepreneur, you're always scouting, whether that's for new customers, new opportunities, new employees, or in our case, potential investors. And for the priority around it, not as high as it would be if we really needed the money, but it's something that I think as we look at how we want to grow, and as we take a look at some of the performance we're going to see from some products that are on our platform that are just maybe 3 to 6 months old, we want to see how they do in another 6 months, 3 to 6 months. We'll start to figure out if we want to add more and grow faster than what our cash flow is allowing. So right now, not a huge priority around raising and creating an actual round, but that may change in the future for sure.
So you've already given a handful of really great insights into bootstrapping, maybe some things that other people can apply into building their businesses. So, one is you had a good handle on the problem that you were solving because of the services company that you had. And that's, I actually have a friend he's on his like third company, and he starts every company the same way, which is he builds a services company, and then he figures out which part of that he can automate and scale into a technology company. So that's a really great strategy. Two was, you found a big customer that could essentially fund your seed round and help a lot of the initial development. Are there other tips that you have for founders who either considering bootstrapping because maybe they don't want to take the dilution of venture capital, or who are just forced to bootstrap because VCs don't believe or don't understand what it is they're building?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest takeaways for me is build the team first before you build any tech. And when I say build the team, that doesn't mean you have to go out and hire folks, put them on payroll. That means that you need a brain trust of folks that understand the business, but that bring their own lens. And so for us, that was, in the early days, we had someone who was director of a lab. We had someone who was a physician. We had someone who had worked and scaled a direct-to-consumer lab testing startup. And then we had someone who worked in compliance. And so taking all that, we created what we call a medical advisory board. This is not like a board of directors. This is a board who, they're interested in seeing the company grow because they realize it can serve either something they're doing or they truly believe in the future of the space. They're excited to be part of it, to give their honest and sometimes brutal feedback in exchange for just a Zoom meeting. But that's my biggest takeaway that I hope folks really hope it resonates. A medical advisory board is not something that will cost you other than time and diligence, but it will reap benefits ongoing for the life of the company so long as you have it.
That's great. I mean, I've never heard of people following that strategy specifically. Can you talk a little bit about how you went about that process? And one question that I'm specifically curious about, because I've met a lot of entrepreneurs who struggle with this, is how do you go about talking to people about, in the very early stages when you're just coming up with the idea? I think a lot of entrepreneurs tend to be very shy in the early stages when they're going through that idea development process because they don't want to sound stupid, or they're embarrassed about, having the wrong ideas, or, some people are also even afraid of like their ideas being stolen. Can you just share what that experience was like for you and how you went about building that advisory board?
Yeah, for sure. I think some of the folks on that board led to others. So I know I had a trusted friend who had helped scale a lab testing company, a consumer lab testing company. And I said, I like talking to you. I really like the feedback you're giving me on this, but he wasn't a physician. I said, do you know a physician I should speak to? Introduce me to a physician. And then that physician, I said, I like your perspective as well. Is there a lab we should be speaking to? And he referred me to the CEO of a lab. And so I think networking in that fashion, and when I say in that fashion, it's you want to be very clear and upfront that, hey, I'd love your feedback. And I'm looking to understand more about your perspective because I know you have experience with X. And what that X is some level of track record or success or progress that person has in your space. Because yes, there's these beautiful stories, or maybe not so beautiful, about co-founders who just, they were in the same dorm, or they met at the, in college, or whatever the case may be, and they end up building these great companies. There's nothing wrong with that either. But when you have a vision for what you want to create, and you can find someone who represents a missing piece of the puzzle, and they share that vision, then there's trust. And I think those other co-founder stories are all great. They have some level of trust in their story as well. But when you're building, knowing that, part of the stakeholders, if I'm evaluating the stakeholders in my space, in my business, I need a lab, I need a physician, I need an operator who has experience with these type of companies. Then you start kind of going, okay, these are the folks I need to talk to. Yeah, you want to be protective of some of the information, right? You don't want to give away the farm, but you also got to know that to go somewhere and to go far, you got to go with others, right? I think there's an African proverb that says something like that along those lines. But really, when you share your vision, you'll know when someone has a shared vision or has some overlap, wants to help you build it. And it does take a little bit of sort of being vulnerable, but at the same time, it gives you the ability to practice that pitch, gives you the ability to earn someone's trust, and at the same time benefit from their network. And you never know where that can take you.
That's awesome, man. So we only have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure I save a little bit of time for questions. But there's one thing I did want to go back and ask you about, and this is not related to order specifically, but it's more tied to the concept of being an entrepreneur. So you do a lot of volunteer work in Houston in helping people get plugged into tech. You come from a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood. You come from a non-traditional background, at least in the entrepreneurship world. So you mentioned at some point, you took this business school class or this class in high school about business, and then at some point you decided you were going to be an entrepreneur. Can you talk to what that switch was in your brain when you decided, like, I'm a business person and I'm an entrepreneur? And do you have any advice for people who maybe want to see themselves as entrepreneurs or need to see themselves as entrepreneurs in making that jump into having that mentality? Because I do think it's something that you have to kind of decide that you are at some point.
I think you're right. And I think in the early days, like I mentioned, my first business, I just wanted to own a cool website. And, at the same time, it's an interesting story because it was about restaurants and about the menu. And I thought that was a cool idea. But when I walked into a restaurant one time in Houston, and, this was about 6 months into it, I walked in and I said, "Hey, we'd like to get your menu online." And back then they had no idea what I was talking about, but this manager said, "Oh yeah, you're with City Search, right?" And my company was not City Search; it was BayouMenus.com because we're the Bayou City. But I realized, oh, there's somebody else out there. And as a first-time entrepreneur, City Search, I went home, looked it up. City Search was in 180 cities, and they basically were the white pages, the first online white pages for businesses. And in my mind, I thought, oh, I guess somebody else is kind of doing this, even though they weren't showing the menus. In my mind, I was like, oh, I guess I'm toast, right? I guess I'm done. And I ended up going to North Carolina State that next semester. And in North Carolina, there was a company called TriangleMenus.com. And I was like, oh, what are they doing differently? Turns out they were actually charging not just a monthly fee to host your menu. They were basically an online advertisement for that restaurant. And I realized, oh, there's actually a business model. And I realized I like kind of digging into what makes a business work. And I think even then, right, I wasn't totally convinced I was an entrepreneur, but I think what really got me is that subsequent businesses, it bothered me that my vision for how that industry could be shaped didn't exist. It kept me up at night. It literally kept me up at night. I remember being in a college dorm thinking about a business that I wanted to create, and I had to get out of bed and write down my ideas. And I think that over the years, I've kind of refined my definition, but I think an entrepreneur, is very simple. They see the world as it is, but they have a vision for how it could be, and they'll stop at nothing until they see that come to fruition. And that's been my experience. And it's important. It's a very simple definition, but really, when you see the world for how it is, you have to be very honest with yourself. You have to understand how things work. But if you do have a vision for how it could be, you also have to be very honest with yourself and how realistic you can actually achieve that. And sometimes, stopping at nothing does have its sacrifices, does have its low moments. But I would say that I've held on with my various businesses on what I thought the end goal needed to be, what I thought the definition of success should be, and achieved, at least for orders, definitely achieved that vision.
Yeah, that's great, man. Real quick, if anyone has questions, if you could plug them into the chat, and then I'll read them out as they come through. But to kind of piggyback off of what you just said, Erik, I think I've worked with a lot of there's some scientists here, a lot of engineers who have created awesome inventions, who've created awesome products, and not necessarily the people on this call, but I have met a lot of, for example, like scientists who have created some incredible new discovery, and they don't put it out into the world because of this thing that you just mentioned, where it's like you kind of got to do everything that you got to do to get it out, whether it's finding that first customer or getting the patent or finding that first investment. And a lot of people I think tend to not think of themselves as entrepreneurs because they think of some person in a suit. But I love your definition, because your definition sort of implies that any person who's looking to create a change in the world can be an entrepreneur. And maybe that change has to come through the mechanism of a business. And that's where developing the skill set of whatever, raising money and hiring people and accounting and all of these things starts to become relevant and important. Let me see if nobody has any questions. I have more that I can ask. Oh, here they go. So we have a question from some guy, Paul Barron. Never heard of this dude. Did you have to, and if you did, how did you incentivize your advisory board and or board of advisors?
Yeah, so it's interesting because different levels for different folks, but never not money, because I think that's a very low value incentive, quite frankly. What I tapped into, and I think that if your product is something that you really believe in, you're going to find folks who want to see that product exist because it actually might benefit their business. So think of the lab that was helping me out. They saw this as, okay, if this is a success, then we may see more volume because of this kind of platform. The physician that was helping us out, different reason. It was, I really believe in this product and I do think it needs to exist. As a physician, I believe this is the future of healthcare. And so, and then there are other people that really have a talent. Maybe it's design, maybe it's development. They have a talent for what they do, but they believe in you. And more than anything, they just want to bring their talents to you to help you build your product. Has nothing to do with healthcare, or maybe it has nothing to do with space, but those are the three things I see. It's either somebody could benefit, and that's why they're giving you their honest feedback. Somebody believes in the future of the space because of their experience in the space, or somebody just has this raw talent that just believes in you and is willing to help you.
When you had a question, she says, could you put a time aspect to the journey that you just described? And also, was there any IP involved?
Yeah, for orders, I will say it started with my first healthcare startup in 2013. It was a failure. But what I learned is we were building something for the right user, but the business model was positioned in a way to make it look as if, we were trying to compete with big box healthcare tech. But in terms of timeline, maybe that was 2013, 2014. I really didn't start thinking of orders specifically until about 2017. And that's when I started building out the team. About 2018 is when we said, okay, we're now starting a company. And then about 2019 is we launched our first customer. And so it takes a while. And then sort of IP wise, we wanted to make sure that our tech is as protected as it could be. So, we have a lot of documentation for how to use our tech, our API, but on the user experience for our physicians or our brands, our companies, our customers, we try to keep that, lock and key and don't put a lot of information out there because we do feel it's part of our competitive advantage. And when you talk about IP, I assume you might be thinking trademark, copyright, and or patents. And I will say our most valuable IP is trade secret. There are things that we don't discuss. There are things that we don't divulge. And that is how we're able to maintain a little bit of a competitive edge from our customers. Or from our competitors, sorry.
Yeah. I don't think we have any more questions from the audience. I have one more question for you, which is,
sure.
Are there any ways that anybody on this call can help? Do you have any plugs for things that you could use support on, or can we follow you anywhere, subscribe to anything, newsletters?
Sure. I'm not super active, but on Twitter, it's Erik Pavia. So I was fortunate to get that one a long time ago. Of course, anyone that is in healthcare at some point, and this speaks to sort of healthcare as like I said, it fragmented a while back and now it's starting to come back together, right? So if it diverged, it's converging again. But what's happening is companies are realizing that if they're in healthcare, well, lab testing, diagnostics is actually a big part of it. And so if anybody has any initiatives that could benefit from understanding more about how lab testing is done today, I'd love to talk to them. And I think, you know, other than that, you know, I definitely on LinkedIn is a great way to keep up with us or keep up with myself or the company. But yeah, I think that for me is how I see the future of healthcare. And of course, if I'm able to help in any way, in form of like, you know, being able to give back, I'm happy to talk to folks about how I see the space and how I see healthcare.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Well, we really appreciate you
Absolutely.
taking the time to talk. Your story is an awesome story. Again, I think you kind of upend a lot of the stereotypes for like what entrepreneurship looks like or should look like. But I also think your story is like more representative of like what the real world looks like, right? More
Totally.
entrepreneurs look and sound like you and have been through your path than what we get fed on the media. Oh, actually, there's one more question
Sure.
that came to me direct. Let me. It's what are the vision mindset of your team or key milestones of your company to go to market with a scientific product with IP and FDA approval in the U.S. market?
So there are some aspects of that when we're talking about FDA approval that I probably couldn't speak to, but I know there's some organizations. I think there's one in Houston. I can't remember the name of it. I think it's called, I want to say it's Galen Data, but they do help with FDA approval on certain devices. I'm not totally certain about that, but the first part of the question was sort of the vision mindset. If you'll repeat that.
Yeah. So what are the vision, the mindset of your team or key milestones of your company to go to market with the scientific product with IP and FDA approval in the US market?
You know, I can definitely speak to our team. We're always thinking about the voice of the customer and what they need to be successful. You know, we're a B2B, right? So we're actually trying to walk in the shoes of our customer and make sure that what we're building absolutely serves their needs, helps them be successful, allows them to innovate on top of our platform. Go to market in terms of, you know, a scientific product and trying to get approval for that. I will say that is something that I don't have firsthand experience, but in 2014, I was in the first ever cohort of the TMC Accelerator, and we were dealing with companies that were in the med device or scientific product space, if you will. I know it is, there's a lot to it, and then there's a lot of compliance and regulation behind it. But I will say there are, I don't want to say consultants, but there are companies and probably consultants, but there are folks out there who've been there and figuring out your best path and trying to get in to those rooms where those folks have either they've done it before or companies or accelerators that can guide you, I would say is your best bet, at least from what I've seen in the space.
Great. Thank you, Eric.
Sure.
All right, man, don't want to take up too much of your time. Thank you, everybody, for attending and listening. We have another one of these talks scheduled for, not scheduled yet, lined up for next month. Another one of our friends, Isai Cortez, is going to be talking about his work building sync books. And we're just working on finalizing a date. So if you signed up for this, we should have your contact information. We'll be able to share that. But Isai's also got like a great story, you know, also bootstrapped this company and has built something really successful without having to go out and raise VC in sort of this underserved and overlooked market. But we really appreciate the time, everybody. And thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.